Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. As I always say, it's good to be with you, and it's always especially good to be with my two very good friends and colleagues, Phoebe Francis. Hey, hi, Phoebe. Hi, Phoebe.
Hello, hello, hello. Greetings to all.
Yeah, no, my other friend, Mohammed. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello, Graham and Phoebe.
Really, really good to be with you, as always. I hope you had a successful week, gentlemen. I hope that the week that's passed has helped you learn even more about leadership. And I want to
Yeah,
talk today, if we can, about something that some people might find a little unusual for leaders. As fathers, I think these are really important things, but as leaders, they are also important. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about stories. What? Why should you tell stories? Let's get on with the job. Let's work out how much more profit we can make. Let's look at how much we can save on the bottom line. No, let's talk about stories. So, Mohammed, if I was to say to you, what do stories mean to you? What would your response be?
I have lots of stories about the importance of stories. And everything that happens during the week, if you ask me, I will just throw stories. But stories, regardless of what they mean, they are so important, okay? Even to those who deny them, or those who want to avoid storytelling in their work, or those who say, let's do without storytelling, they are using stories daily to run their life, to run their business, but they just don't call them stories. Stories are around us so obviously that we don't feel them. It's like the traffic, it's like the air. And all we need to do as leaders is to bring those stories in our favor and in the favor of those we serve as leaders and empower.
Let
That's
me
how I
make,
look at stories.
let me make one comment before I pass on to Phoebe, based on what you just said. What occurs to me is our life, our individual life, yours, mine, Phoebe's, everyone's, is a story, is it not?
It is
Phoebe, how do you
unfolding.
Phoebe, tell me, how does the word story impact on you? What do you think about when you think of that word?
I think as you said, we are all characters in stories. Each moment, each day, each week, each year, and
Yeah,
what stories we tell. And we also have to understand, especially when leading organization, if you are in positions of power, you are acting in front of your audience as in a stage. They are observing your body language, facial expressions,
sure, sure,
eye movements,
sure.
and the smile, the anchor, the face which is grumpy, all are read and all create stories each moment.
So not only that we're hearing the story, but that person telling the story is also the performer, we could say. Let me just go back a little bit in terms of the impact of stories. Stories have been told through the thousands and thousands of years that we have been on this planet. They are so much a critical part of our cultures, our faith, who we are. Now, as an Australian, I know that the original Australians have been on this continent for hundreds, thousands of years. And the Aborigines that are here talk about the dream time. And this is about the stories that are passed down by the nightly camp, the nightly fire, as the older men and I guess women tell stories. And in all cultures, this must apply. The stories of our faith, the stories of our culture are passed on down the line. And I know that in the Arab culture and the Muslim faith, stories are told and told about what happened. They're passed down. And as I'm sure that many of the people who are listening to us are parents. And if you're a parent, you know the power of a story because your children usually want to be told a story at that earlier age, or they will be persuaded to go to bed if they are given the offer of a story. I'll read you a story if you go to bed now. Yo, yes, Daddy. because they love hearing the story. Am I right? You guys are
Yeah,
fine.
let me
Yeah.
let me tell you how important a story is, what it does, okay? We usually want to convince others by talking, communicating, persuading. We bring numbers, we bring evidences, or we can bring stories, all right? And they do the magic that everything else does. Okay, so here's a little story. I was doing a program for UN advisors in 2017 following the release of the new global goals, SDGs, all right? Sustainable Development Goals. So I was supposed to give them a seminar on how to present information. They were coming from different places in the Middle East. One lady kept resisting the fact that stories are important. I told them, when you express anything and you want to convey information about the places you are covering, etc., use also stories, not only information and statistics. She said, no, only statistics and only information. We are not there to tell stories. I said, ma'am, I tried to convince her. She said, no. Suddenly, the seminar became a debate between me and her. I came close to her chair and everybody was watching this wrestling, okay? And she is pushing and pushing and until I gave up. And then she gave me the last nail in the coffin. She said, we cannot tell stories. I told her, why not? She said, because one day there was one guy I was working with. I said, stop.
Yeah.
Why are you telling me a story?
Touche.
She got frozen, everybody laughed, and we brought peace back in the UN room. Okay. And then she convinced me with a story that stories are not important. It is that powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me just quickly go into this. Stories involve emotions. We connect to emotions. Stories involve images and we see the image in our mind. Stories relate to what someone else has achieved and how they've climbed the mountain, and we relate to that. We want to listen to the stories. We want to hear them engage us in what has been done and what has been achieved, and we can relate to that. I'm sorry, but I don't easily relate to the figures of January 1937 when that X increased by 27.5%, which what? Phoebe.
Yeah, I was just thinking the story which Mohammed shared, and in workplace, what we see in on a regular scenario is what emotions are getting generated.
Yeah.
And whether it is driving people forward or whether it is pulling back.
Yes.
And imagine a leader who is understanding how he or she is in stage in that situation determines where the organization is taken.
Yeah.
And we can see there are organizations which have faced hurdles, overcoming that because a leader is able to inspire them with stories which are encouraging the people to take action. So that is something which is coming to my mind again and again. And we can see, being in Dubai, how that is getting shaped. One example is Expo 2020, which happened a few years back. How we managed COVID a few years back. So that is what coming to my mind, how we bring in resilience in our group setting through stories.
True stories. And look, when I was doing sales training, I had a bunch of stories that I told. When I was doing emotional intelligence, I have a bunch of stories. In the leadership sphere, I have a bunch of stories. And the stories that I have relate to the instances that are specific in the leadership challenge. For each of the 5 practices, when I'm delivering workshops, I've got stories that are related to those 5 practices. But I have a little bit of an advantage, I guess, because I've worked in so many countries. I try as far as possible to have stories that relate to the people in those countries. So I'm going to avoid telling stories about Australia if I'm in India, unless I can connect that relevance to that situation, because I don't want people to think, who is this guy who's now coming telling stories about Australia? We don't care about Australia. We've got to have the stories relevant to the audience. So simple terms, I'm not going to tell a sales story if I'm talking to people about leadership. So it's got to be relevant to them, and it connects. And when it connects, they remember. Now, let's just look more specifically about telling stories in the workplace.
Yes.
Give me an example of where we could tell stories, Mohammed, in the workplace.
Yes. So when we say leaders need to use stories, the word use can be as broad as not just the leader being the storyteller and everybody's listener. No, you use stories in your workplace in different ways. One, obvious one, you tell stories. Two, you use the stories of others. Encourage your teammates and followers to bring up the stories. Three, the events that the workplace, there are events in the workplace which you and your team are concerned with. You use those events in a story context. So what's happening today? What has happened yesterday? What is the default that happened? How can we solve it? So you encourage a story which is unfolding and a story which is not told yet. So guys, how can we make this better? Well, how can we make a beautiful end for this problem in that unit? So tell me what we should do. So all of this is called using a story. To summarize, your stories, their stories, the events, and the stories we all want to make at the end of the day.
But let me just hold this for a moment and just reinforce what you're just saying in terms of the relevance of the workplace. Let's just create this scenario. As the leader, I come into the team meeting and I'm 2 minutes late. And I apologize and say, guys, I'm really sorry I'm 2 minutes late, but I just need to tell you what held me up. As I was coming through the reception area, our receptionist, and we all know what a wonderful job she was doing, she was dealing with a very difficult person who had come in about an issue. And the way she handled that and what she said was truly representative of the values of this organization. And I will go and tell her what I thought, what I was experiencing when I saw the way she was dealing with this. But she had another call come immediately after she finished this, and I wasn't able to say anything to her. But I will go when this meeting's over and I'll talk to her. So I just want you now to know what this woman did and how what she did represents the real values of this organization. Right? I made that up.
Yeah.
But it has relevance, doesn't it? Phoebe, I stopped you and I shouldn't have.
No, what I was just trying to add is, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are characters, and the characters are judged. So as people who are having influence in organizations, one aspect is, again, I come back to the leadership challenge: model the way. What are you modeling? And that is where the values, as you rightly mentioned, the values are being observed in these actions. And I particularly remember, having a leader who is in the workplace saying that, okay, this is what we want, and this is how we can do that. And you have all the freedom to do that. And when he mean freedom, he mean real freedom. You don't have to get his permission to do that.
Yeah.
And that is an incident in which we all have flourished in a department where working together was like a fantastic experience, where everyone was encouraged to take action, and that action is fully supported. And that is what, when that word freedom is used. And that is why I said, how leaders model that way, and that stories are being spread.
Sure.
And that stories take action in the hearts of people, so that is also encouraging the heart, as we see in the leadership challenge.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
So one more aspect which I just want to share is, people see what values are being promoted through those stories which they tell. And that shapes the culture of what we do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And look, one of the things about stories is, I'm sure that people, when they hear the story, I hope that they don't think it's about the individual, but rather who's telling the story, but rather that they relate to it and they can do it as well. One quick story that goes through my mind now is when I was flying from Uganda some years ago back to Dubai on an airline called Emirates. And yes, I was flying business class. And I watched one of the flight attendants as she was moving around the cabin, talking to each person as she walked around. And when she came to me, she was about to ask me if she could help me. I said, excuse me, do you mind if I say something first? And she was surprised by that. She said, yes. And I said, I just want to say, I've been watching you and you obviously love what you're doing. And she was surprised by that. And she said, well, I don't know that I love it, but I just love talking to people. And I said, wow, that really shows. She then said to me, thank you. You have just made my day. Now, I'm not telling this story so that people say, what a great guy Graham is. He makes people's day. I want people to think, I can do that. I can say that to someone else and I can make their day, right? That's the point of me telling this story. So that's why I think stories have that value. Think, how easy is it to say something like this to someone and make a difference to their day, to the security guard when you come in and say, and tell these other stories about how we can impact on people around us. But it also relates to not only the values that we're living, but about telling them about how someone challenged the process, how someone said, oh, let's try this and this and this. And you know what? This is what happens. Wow, yeah, we can do that as well. When I'm in Dubai, I tell a story about how the design of the Palm Jumeirah came about. Now, I'm not going to tell that story now, but I tell it a lot when I'm in Dubai and in the region, and people go, wow, this is really good. And so the point of that story really is that there would not have been a Palm Jumeirah if Sheikh Mohammed had not challenged the process. So I'm saying, using that as a story for people to challenge and ask questions and say, can't we do bigger and better? And we can all build,
Beautiful.
we can all build Palm Jumeirahs.
Yeah, beautiful. And that story in the flight that you mentioned, all right?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story. What's beautiful about it is, one, you didn't make it up this time, okay? All right? And how did we know? When we tell a story in that detail and we hear you, we don't only hear the words that you tell that describe the story, but the emotions were really evident. Phoebe, correct? Right? We felt that. And even the viewers and listeners will feel that stories in the Emirates flight. So stories also do something amazing. They bring out your real character, your true self. And we know in our leadership challenge research, to be an honest is the top quality people admire in a leader, an honest leader. So how do you think it will come if you do not tell stories?
Yeah.
So go ahead, just tell any story to your team and they will be encouraged to tell theirs. And suddenly there is an environment of trust and good relationships, which is the best, foundation for work.
This is, when you say everybody should be, well, I keep saying everybody should tell stories. I put a little caveat or rider on that when it comes to speakers, and you would understand this, Mohammed. I say the story has got to be your story. And I'm aware that there are stories, if we're going way back, a story of, and I don't, we must know this, it's an old story, of I was walking along the beach on my holiday and there were thousands of shells that were washed up onto the shore. And I thought, oh my gosh, these poor creatures that are washed up on the shore. So I started throwing these little creatures back into the water, thousands of shells, and I started throwing some of them back. And someone came along and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm trying to save these creatures. And this gentleman said, but there's so many of them. You can't help them. And the response is, I just helped him. I just helped him, as they're throwing each one up. Now, it's a story that says, I'm doing a little thing to achieve a great result. But the problem with that particular story is so many speakers tell that same story and you go, blimey, don't do it again. So the point is, stories happen to us all every day. We interact with the supermarket checkout person. We interact with other people in the supermarket. We all drive on on the highways. We all go to interact with other people, and there are stories there that we can use. if we just make the connection. We are watching our colleagues in the workplace. We are watching what's happening in other organizations. And there are stories that will impact on others.
One thing which
Don't copy
Graham,
someone else's
when
story
you
and tell
mentioned,
them it's yours.
one thing which Graham, when you mentioned the connection part, come to my mind is, I had a fantastic leader in my work. And one thing he always do is a check-in with all the employees in his team, half an hour to 45 minutes every week. Or at least I have experienced it twice a month. And he asked, how are you, Phoebe? And what is happening in your life? And, we share what comes in. And it was a really connection building process, And and it is more, he listens to what is in our world. And that actually is also inspiring someone, when you see someone listening to our stories, our worries, our anxieties. It was actually a coaching process in which he is not giving it as a solution, but asking some questions which help us. So, that story is also a sharing and a connection building process. And I think it shines a light in us when we are intentional in our action.
Yes. And look, when we're in the workplace, there are so many opportunities for us to tell stories, to lift people up, not only about values, as we touched on earlier, but in other areas as well. I often use this as an example of how to get a positive feeling in a meeting with your team. And that is to say, you don't have to do this every time, you can vary it, but to say, okay, I'm going to give everybody of these 6 people in the room or 8 people in the room, I'm going to give you each 2 minutes to tell a story of something really wonderful or positive that's happened to you in the last week. 2 minutes to tell us a story of something that happened to you in the last week that was really positive. And we go around the room and I say, by the way, there is no pass. There's not me today. No, everybody. What happens when everybody has shared 2 minutes of something really positive that's happened to them in the last week? What happens? You set a positive environment for the meeting that you're about to have. Everyone's feeling positive because they've shared and talked about positive things that have happened to them. So we're using stories in that instance to change the atmosphere in the meeting rather than just walking in the meeting, saying, okay, item number 1, how can we improve our figures? No. Set the tone of the meeting by getting people to tell a story of 2 minutes or a variation of that.
You see, leaders can look for stories in almost everywhere in the workplace. Numbers, which are for some people the opposite of stories. In fact, behind them, there are so many stories. All you need to do is to help your team look at the numbers and tell me what's the story behind that. In health and safety, I use this example a lot. And when I do programs for a company regarding the safety management and performance, I tell them, what's the first thing, especially industrial companies, what's the first thing you see when you clock in the morning through the gate? And they say, we see this board. What is that board? They say the numbers of man hours without lost time injuries. I said, So for each department and each division, there's a different bar. And the departments are competing. So if the bar is high in safety, what does it mean? And they kept, we are doing well in safety. In what way are we doing well in safety? You tell me, what do you do? And suddenly, without them knowing it, they are going into stories. So leaders can bring the numbers with the team and tell them, okay, we did well in this number. How did we do well? What did we do? Not just take the numbers and celebrate. What happened that we reached there? And what do we need to raise the other number there? All stories are all around you and especially behind numbers. So bring numbers to life by bringing stories behind them.
Yeah, you change behaviors when you do this, don't you? Phoebe?
Yeah, again, the beauty of numbers, when we have the strategy meeting, I have heard some of the leaders sharing why we have this strategy. And that why is a story. And that inspires people to take action. And again, I just want to think about my own academic life. In my, I scored very less during my grade 12. It was only 49%. And when I came to the degree program, finally, after third chance, fourth chance, you get an admission to the degree college. Not you are in the waiting list. You are a 49 percentage, and there was a professor who has shared a story. Your life is not determined on your marks, and he shared inspiring stories of how people became very, very successful, even though they had lower marks. And that story still inspires me. The words, it enables me to act. And that is powerful for me in my life. So I think, what can we do if we have these enabling stories, enabling others to act, those stories in our workplace?
Phoebe, when you tell this story, what is going through my mind is that I hope that there are people who are listening to us now who will think, I can't tell stories. I don't relate. But you, in telling that story, as you did, hopefully will inspire other people to think, oh, well, yeah, I could probably tell stories like that as well and help others make a change in their lives. So well done. This is what stories do. It really is such a powerful tool to get people motivated, to get people engaged, to get people wanting to be there. And, sometimes it's stories about your children that can have an impact. It can be stories about what happened on the freeway when you're driving to work that day. And, there are emotional intelligence stories that I use in that situation that relate to what happened in the traffic. We're all in traffic. We get frustrated by the hold up and we sometimes react negatively. Is that, all of these common things that we relate to. So one final point on stories. Mohammed.
Okay, so I have one last advice to everyone in the workplace who is leading others. We are used to tell them in the sense of giving orders, tell them what to do. I just want to add something else extra. Tell them a story and they will do what you want them to do. That's it.
Yes, absolutely. Phoebe.
Yeah, we all have encouraging stories which encourages other hearts.
Yeah, and I really hope that people who are listening to us, as I said 2 minutes ago or so, that people think, yeah, actually, maybe I've got stories that I can share that will help others who are working with me, as an example of what they can do. And there have been things that have happened to me along the way, and I tell those stories, hopefully to have other people think, wow, I can do that too. Or, wow, that's the effect of when you do this to someone else. Oh my gosh, I should do that. It's like encourage the heart, which you've mentioned a couple of times, Phoebe. We know the look in the face of people who are responding to having their heart encouraged. And when I tell people that, oh, really? And then they want to do it so that they see the reaction from other people. So the story is never ending. And we listen to stories, we watch stories on television, we read stories. Stories are such an important part of our lives. Gentlemen, I hope this has been an interesting story for people who have been with us for this particular conversation. And we're going to be back again next week, aren't we, gentlemen?
Yes, but until then, we also would love to hear your stories. If you want to share with us, please, you know how to do that. We are available.
Absolutely. And the best way to do it is Graham, Graham, at leadershipchallengemiddealeast.com, please. It's on the channel. It's on the site there. So please send us your comments. Phoebe.
Yeah, and always subscribe, share, make, and help us to reach more people to listen to the stories.
Oh, wow. What a wonderful way to finish up. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure. We'll be back together next week.